I'm Chance Dorland, and in San Antonio, military means local. This is Military City, a podcast from expressnews.com. San Antonio Express News senior reporter Sig Christensen was embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division during the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 and has reported on military-related topics for decades. On this podcast, Sig and I discuss the military stories important to San Antonio, both from today and the past. 6 weeks ago, Army Specialist Alec Alcozer and his working dog, Alex, turned the corner on a narrow street just after dawn and saw a young Afghan coming toward them. What happened next is the subject of today's episode. So, Sig, great to have you back here on the podcast. Let's start with some information from before that day. Rolling back the clock a little bit, we'll, of course, get to what happened that day later on as well. So, who is the 22-year-old we're discussing on today's episode?
Alec is a young dog handler, military working dog handler. He's trained here in San Antonio. He actually is from San Antonio. He graduated from Harlandale High School, which has been known for producing a lot of the veterans who were killed in Vietnam from San Antonio. And it's a principally Hispanic school in a Hispanic part of town. He has a dog, or did have this dog, Alex, and they pretty much were best buddies, as dog handlers and the dogs are. They lived together. He trained with them. They did everything together, right down to having a ritual before they'd go out on missions. He would have some ice cream, and the dog Alex would get some treats. And then they would go out. And in Afghanistan, it is a pretty dangerous place where either suicide bombers or roadside bombs are concerned. That's been the principal means for attacking American and Afghan National Army troops for years and years now. And in this case, they had been together for quite a while, and were working one morning. It was before dawn, and there was suddenly a big explosion. The dog was pretty badly hurt. He lost a leg, and Alec Alcozer, he was hit by a lot of shrapnel. He suffered a mild brain injury. Doesn't seem to be any real issue there in terms of his cognitive processes, but he's learning to walk again. And so they got together for the first time last week. That was the first time they got together since they were in Walter Reed, and a commander there presented both of them with Purple Hearts. The commanders have a wide latitude, and they can present a Purple Heart to a dog, and Alex, sure enough, got one.
We'll talk more about that event and also what happened 6 weeks ago here in a moment. But I want to know more about their relationship and when these two individuals, similar names, Alec, the human being, Alex, the canine, when they met. And was that a choice on Alec's part? Did he choose to go into that line of service? Was he selected? Tell me more about that.
Well, I don't know whether he volunteered for it or not. You take a lot of tests, and they figure out before you get a job. They figure out what you're most suited to do. And I don't exactly know how a test would show you to be suited to be a dog handler, but he has a lot of good, and he being Alec, the dog handler, he has a lot of good traits. He loves the dog. He has a real bond with the dog, and you can see it. And, they trained at some point, but there was an original training process for that dog, and it happened right here in San Antonio. There's a military working dog school here, and they train the dogs that go to war, literally. And there's a long history of armies doing that. You can go all the way back to ancient Rome, and certainly before that. Armies had dogs. Dogs were used for all kinds of reasons. And the Germans were well ahead of us at the beginning of World War II, and the Army started to call out for both dogs and families to care for them. We still have a tradition of families acting as adoptive puppy families for these dogs before they're at an age where they can begin training. And Alex walked into the process at some point, began training his dog, and they developed quite a bond. And when you talk to dog handlers, what you discover is that a handler and his working dog, they may be closer than a husband and a wife. They spend probably more time together. And if the dog is sick, the handler goes to the dog and spends time with him, hours and hours with him. It's a unique relationship in the military. There's nothing really quite like it. And there's almost a mythology about it. And I can only tell you that they all become very close. There was a dog in Vietnam that's now lionized over at Lackland. He's dead, of course, but during the Tet Offensive, this dog would not leave the side of his handler, and the dog actually killed a Viet Cong soldier, physically killed the soldier to protect his master. And the trick at the end of the battle was convincing the dog to allow one of the Americans to come in and take the handler out and get him on a medevac. And the only reason why the dog allowed it was because it was his former handler that came in to pull his buddy out of there. So it's a unique bonding. And if you go to the story and see the video, you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, online now at expressnews.com. There's also a link to all the stories that you've recently written for us, Sig. There are videos. There's lots more information than what we can cover in today's episode alone. But let's get to what we're talking about now. So several weeks back, this happened. You recently, within the last couple of weeks, met Alec and Alex, as you've already explained. You spoke with him about the experience that they shared. Let's hear a bit of that conversation that will shed some light on what happened between the two.
It was August 5th. The patrol happened right outside Bagram, Afghanistan. We started around, I think it was 3 o'clock in the morning we met, and it was 4 o'clock in the morning when we dismounted. The patrol was running smooth. There was no intel of any hostile intent in the area, so that's why there was so little of us. We came around a corner, and I saw an individual approaching. Looked kind of young. I didn't think nothing of it. But because the road was too narrow, I didn't want to brush up against him. And I didn't want my dog to brush up against him. So I alerted to the Afghan army to go search him. So 2 Afghan soldiers and 3 of my Czech brothers went to go search him. And I recalled my dog back to me. And I put him in the down. And I bent down to grab a cigarette, and that's when the whole world just kind of went upside down. And it was all yellow and orange because of the dust. And there was a short ambush afterwards. My adrenaline allowed me to shoot back at the enemy. And then there was a waiting game for the medevac. I put all 4 tourniquets on me. And the 4th one of the soldiers had to help me, and I just waited there with my dog.
Conscious the whole time?
Conscious the whole time.
What were you thinking?
I actually got real close to God. It's crazy how ultra religious you become when you think you're about to meet who created you and explain all the things that you've done. And every once in a while I would yell at Alex to make sure he was still okay. That's what was going through my head. Juice too. I was thinking of the last time I tasted juice and how I would really like to taste juice again. It's crazy, but that's just what ran through my head.
So that was the event that happened that led to both Alec and Alex being injured. And of course, Sig, one of the questions that you asked was, how was the dog during all of this? Here's what he had to say.
I think he was in a state of shock. He yelped when it initially happened, and he ran over to my thigh, and throughout the firefight and everything, he stayed right there. He didn't move.
He was right next to you
the whole time, and like that. And I would yell at him, and his ears would twitch, but he wouldn't look at me. I think he was just in a state of shock. He didn't growl, he didn't bark, he didn't yell, he didn't cry. He stayed right there. I did my best to, I used my combat gauze to kind of pack his wound a little bit. He didn't try to bite me or anything, he just let it happen. And then we just both waited. He trusted a Czech soldier to pick him up and carry him to the medevac when the medevac finally came. And that's all I remember. I remember being in the medevac helicopter with him, and I don't know if I lost consciousness or I just kind of blacked out, but yeah, I lost it after that. That's all I remember.
There is going to be some time involved in Alec recovering. However, as many broken bones as he has, and the doctors started running through the list, and it was just too many to write down. Broken bones in his arms, broken bones in his legs. When you see his legs in the photos that were taken by our photographer, Josie, you'll see that he has a lot of shrapnel marks, nasty bruising along his legs. He's learning to walk again. Now, I've been through this. I had a bad motorcycle accident a long time ago and broke both my legs. It was a miserable experience, and I think that things have gotten better, where it took me a year to walk again, really without anything much more than a limp. He's going to be on his feet and getting around within 6 weeks. It could be less. He's making good progress. He's in the hands of a polytrauma care unit at the VA center. And so they specialize in the kinds of injuries that he has. He was maybe 20 yards away from a suicide bomber. And the miracle of it is that he survived. I mean, you can die just from the overblast, the pressure wave that emanates from a bomb exploding. And it's something that we were taught in hostile environment training. And I have never forgotten how scary that is, because you just don't know when you're that close whether you're going to survive or not. And so he's got some mobility issues, but his mind is good. And he has plans already. He wants to go back and be a dog handler again. He loves the job. And he is going to be friends for life, buddies for life with Alex. Alex is going to come to him, and they're going to be together for as long as Alex lives. He's going to be his owner. And what a nice ending to a really nearly tragic story. It's a really heartwarming tale. And it's great because you can tell how much these two love each other and care for each other. It's a classic dog handler story.
And so to tie in with those last words that you just said, classic dog handler story, is it also classic in that when one of them or both of them are injured, are they reunited, after they're evacuated from the area? And then is that typical? You get to keep your dog after service?
It's more typical now than it was in, say, Vietnam. In Vietnam, I understand they left hundreds of dogs behind. And there are cases where the dogs were reunited. The case that I talked about earlier involving the airmen at the Tet Offensive, they actually were reunited. And not long after the battle. That was more unusual than not in those days. These days, there is widespread awareness of the bonding between these folks, between the dog handlers and their dogs, and people are doing the right thing. They're trying to bring them back together and have them live out their lives with their masters, the people that they had become so close to, and that is an element of enlightenment from this conflict that really heartens me. I've owned animals as pets all my life. We have had 2 Great Pyrenees dogs in a row now, and they're just wonderful animals, and they're real friends. And there's no doubt they really do love you. It's not just that they're there for the food. There's a great bonding that goes on between dogs and other animals and people. It's hard to explain, but it's there, and you really see it with Alec and Alex. They were just. I almost wanted to cry. I was so taken with how they were just right back where they were, and it was as if not a moment had passed. It was like they had been together for years, and it's extremely moving. And thank goodness that we're enlightened enough these days to make these kinds of reunions happen.
And Sig, before we hear our last clip of your discussion with Alec Alcocer, talking about, in his own words, what his current medical situation is, just a refresher for anyone who might know, or someone like myself who certainly doesn't know all the in and outs of why animals like this are included in American military. What kind of services do these dogs provide that would either be more costly if we didn't use dogs, or perhaps something that we couldn't do without canines in the military?
Well, they're very good at smell. And so you can train them to smell drugs. And if you go down to a border entry point or a checkpoint near the Texas border, for example, you'll see that they use them. The dogs will come up to your car and they'll sniff around. If you've got any drugs in there, those dogs will find it. You can camouflage this smell, but it's not really easy to do. This dog, Alex, his job was to smell for explosives. And, it's interesting. He wasn't close enough to the guy with the vest to suddenly get his alarms set off. And that's, I guess, why they didn't catch it quickly enough. But that's what his job was. He was there to detect explosives, and he would go about his job sniffing in cars, sniffing around people, and apparently he had a really good nose. It's interesting, by the way, not every dog does well at this. Some breeds do better than others, so you'll see a lot of Belgian Malinois dogs in the service, and you'll see a lot of German Shepherds as well. It takes a particular kind of dog to keep focused on his job. And it's more unusual than you think, because not every dog can basically hold a thought for a long time without being distracted and wanting to go and do something else. These dogs are laser focused on what they're doing, and it's not easy to get past them. There's nothing else out there that really works as well as a dog to detect things like explosives or drugs. I'm sure that there are other devices out there that are capable of that, but everybody feels like this is the best path to intercepting something before it gets past you and it's too late. And in a place like Afghanistan, you'll see a lot of these dogs, and they're doing a yeoman's work. There are quite a few stories about how they're injured and then they're reunited with their masters permanently. And as I said before, it's just really heartwarming to see that happen. And this was, when they called me to tell me about the story, I almost didn't believe that it was real. I had to really ask some questions. And then I realized that this was the VA hospital calling and that they were on the level. It's a great story, and we don't get it every day around here. So I'm glad we were able to tell it.
Yes, and thank you for joining me to talk about it. San Antonio Express News senior reporter Sig Christensen on today's episode of Military City. And of course, we'll have plenty more episodes in the coming weeks and months covering more stories focusing on San Antonio and also the United States, the past, the current stories, and of course, looking into the future. So let's end things today, Sig, with our final clip from Army Specialist Alec Alcozer talking about his current medical situation.
I'm able to walk with a walker. We haven't tried long distance yet, but the walker is just temporary till my foot kind of cooperates with us, and then I can start walking freely again. Maybe with the cane at first, and then we'll transition to freely. Frustrations. I don't really have any frustrations. I'm just taking it day by day. That's all I can do. There's no point in being mad or sad or anything like that. I gotta live through the people who died for me, so they give me a lot of strength through spirit. And Alex ain't really complaining, so I don't think I should either. His injuries are a little worse than mine.